We are very proud to be ACBSP accredited.
I'm proud to be ACBSP accredited.
I'm proud to be ACBSP accredited.
Hello everyone, welcome to the session entitled Empowering Students' Creativity. Today I'm going to be talking about the teaching of critical and creative thinking and innovation in a business program at Brenau University. I'm Dr. Bill Haney, and I'm a professor of business administration at Brenau. Welcome. And the first thing I really want to do is I want to welcome you to my home. I didn't think many months ago when I submitted the presentation application that I would be delivering this presentation from my home in North Georgia. Gainesville is located about an hour north of Atlanta, Georgia, and is the home of Brenau University. And I live just slightly north of Gainesville in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. So welcome. I'm glad you're here, even under these unusual circumstances. The purpose of today's program is very simple. First, I want you to understand the importance of critical and creative thinking to a business program. And second, I want to explain some of the basic assumptions associated with critical and creative thinking and relate those assumptions to innovation. So we're going to be talking about how critical and creative thinking leads to innovation. I also want to engage you in some exercises that I use in some of my classes that are part of the way I teach critical and creative thinking in the classroom. And then I want to talk about sort of the star of the show, the couple of projects that I use in my classroom that are not just unusual, but I think really empower students to think differently about not only the business they're in, but the future businesses that they could be a part of in their careers. So the first thing I want you to do is I want you to take out a piece of paper and I want you to draw these 9 dots. Now, you may have seen this before in some program that you have been a part of, but just do it anyway. Just put the 9 dots down on a piece of paper, and we're going to come back to that in just a minute. And it becomes sort of the focus or the battle cry of some of the courses that I teach at Brenau University. So just put down the 9 dots, set the piece of paper aside for just a second. We'll definitely come back to that. I want to provide you also with my personal credentials, not because I want to tout any credentials, but I want to raise the question about who is qualified to teach this particular subject matter. Who's qualified to teach critical and creative thinking? As far as I know, there are only maybe 4 or 5 master's degrees that are offered in the United States in critical and creative thinking. And I think, although I'm not positive, there are no doctoral programs specifically geared toward critical and creative thinking. But here are my credentials: a bachelor's degree in psychology, a master's degree in counseling and human systems. I have an MBA. My PhD is in higher education with an emphasis in business and academic administration. And then I went back and did some postdoctoral work during a sabbatical at the University of Massachusetts, earning a graduate certificate in critical and creative thinking. All that kind of put together begs the question, who's qualified to teach this particular subject matter? Now, the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools that Brenau University is a part of is kind of strict in their interpretation of who is qualified to teach what classes, especially on the graduate level. But I still, even though I have been certified to teach these classes, I still ask who and what field is qualified. Is it theology? Is it psychology? Is it education and philosophy? If you look at some of the departments that host these kinds of courses, they're all over the place. I can tell you, rarely have I seen these kinds of courses being offered in the College of Business or in a school of business. So Brenau University, I think, is unique, offering specific courses in critical and creative thinking. And these are the courses that we offer both on the graduate and undergraduate level. On the undergraduate level, a bachelor's degree in business administration, a Bachelor of Arts in organizational leadership, and 2 courses, critical and creative thinking and strategic thinking and innovation. It's all about strategic thinking and innovation in companies today. I can't help but refer to Albert Einstein's famous quote, "Education is not the learning of facts, but the training of the mind to think." So many of our business programs are very content heavy. There's nothing wrong with that. The importance of facts, especially in a business curriculum, is part of why students are in college. But even more important than facts is the importance of teaching students how to think. And with all due respect, I think that there are many faculty members on the collegiate level, especially on the graduate level, and especially in accelerated kinds of curriculum that are out there, programs that are out there, that believe that just because they teach on the college level, that means they also teach critical thinking. That's not true. They might teach facts, they might do it well, but that doesn't mean that they're teaching their students how to think. I also want to talk a little bit about the definition of critical thinking. And if you look at any textbook about this subject, you're going to find a different definition. But I want to refer to the 1990 American Philosophical Association definition of critical thinking, and actually just part of it. It is the process of purposeful, self-regulatory judgment. Those words are powerful. Purposeful thinking, self-regulatory judgment. That is the essence of critical thinking. And it involves a number of skill sets, as you can see here. And I have to chuckle at those who try to assess or measure critical thinking among students. It's so complex. It's very difficult to, at any given time, measure all of these skill sets in a student, and then even later, maybe upon graduation, assess them at a different time. It's a very difficult process to do. But again, the purpose of this is not to go over the definition of critical thinking, but rather to just share some common language so you have an idea. And it's important that we teach it in our business curriculum and our business program. It is emphasized in a number of different surveys, the importance of critical thinking, analytical thinking, creativity, and innovation. For example, in the National Association of Colleges and Employers, it ranks as number 1, problem-solving skills, critical thinking skills, as the skill that is most needed for graduates. In the American Association of Colleges and Universities, it is one of the top 4 or 5 that is requested among employers and recruiters at organizations. Also, the World Economic Forum even got in on the act here, identifying the top skills that are associated with job outlook. And if you look at the growing skill sets that are needed, it's all about imaginative thinking and critical and creative thinking skills identified here. Innovation. But I think the star of the show is the Bloomberg Skills Gap Report. If you've not seen this, you really need to take a look at it. The Bloomberg Skills Gap Report identifies recruiters, 1,250 plus recruiters at over 550 organizations around the nation. And they've identified the skill sets that are most desired and that are least offered at colleges and universities. And so they divided this into different quadrants. This part of the quadrant up at the top are the ones that are less commonly offered in the curriculum. And this section over here are the skill sets that are most desired. So if you look at this and identify what are most desired, what are least offered or least common, you'll see this sweet spot up here. And what is in that sweet spot? Those skills that are most desired by organizations but are not really offered in business curriculum. Well, it's creative problem solving, leadership, strategic thinking, analytical thinking, communication. And it's amazing, you could go to this, I'll give you the reference at the end of this presentation. It's amazing the colleges and universities that are listed. Maybe your university is listed there as in this particular report. I highly encourage you. But this is the sweet spot. If you offer these skills in your curriculum and since organizations need and want these skills, you are really doing your graduates a great service by emphasizing these skill sets in your curriculum. And also, there's something to be said about the value of sheer creativity. Nearly 2/3 feel that being creative is valuable to society. However, only 1 in 4 people feel that they are living up to their creative potential. That says a lot. And why is creativity important? Well, let's face it. Creativity leads to innovation. And it's all about being innovative in today's world economy. So, how do you teach this stuff? That's the basic question. And that's what I want to emphasize in this program here that you're attending. At least this is how I teach this stuff. Well, there are 3 parts to the way I teach this particular subject matter to my students. First is the easy part, is simply teaching the facts associated with critical thinking, the content of critical thinking. That's easy. A good book can help solve that problem. Second, assessing a person's self for those biases or blocks that hinder and even guide them in their functional, critical, and creative thinking. And then finally, and I think most importantly, applying the concepts of critical and creative thinking to their lives immediately, right away, so they can use it in their workplace the very next day. Which leads me to the 9 dots. Pull out your piece of paper. Here's what I want you to do. And again, maybe you have seen this before. If you have, fine, that's good. But what I want you to do is connect all 9 dots with 4 straight lines. Once you put your pencil down on the paper, you can't lift your pencil up. Again, connect all 9 dots with 4 straight lines. Once you put your piece of paper, once you put your pen down on the paper, you can't lift it up. Now, I'm not going to spend time waste time in pausing the video and having you do this. There are 3 groups of people that I found that try to solve this problem. One are the people who have never seen this before. They try to solve this problem and they can't do it. Right? Newbies. The second are the people who can solve this problem for whatever reason right away. They solve it right away. I found those 2 groups to be outliers. Most of the people are the ones I think are the most troublesome. That is, they've seen the solution to this problem before, but they can't remember it. It shows you just how strong society's pull is to conform to thinking inside the box. And that's where at least that's where they think this term has come from. And that is connect all 9 dots with 4 straight lines. Once you put your pen on the paper, you can't lift your pen up. And what it requires you to do is think outside the box. So, 1, 2, 3, 4. Notice you go outside the confines of the psychological box in order to solve this problem. Again, what is most disturbing are those people who have seen this problem before, but they can't remember it because society pulls us back into the box. And so that's disturbing to me. What's interesting is that this became popular in the 1980s and 1990s. In fact, I think the Disney Corporation really popularized this. But this problem was invented by a mathematician back and published in 1914. They've been trying to solve this problem since 1914. I believe it was called the Christopher Columbus egg puzzle back then. And so this is not a new problem that people have been trying to solve. This is an example of how generation after generation can have a hard time thinking outside the box. In this section, I want to talk a little bit about teaching the facts associated with critical and creative thinking. You know what? I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because a good book will really help with this. We happen to use the Vincent Ruggiero book. It's excellent, it's inexpensive, and it's concise. The star of the show of this book, and what I think most of my students get the most out of, is the specific errors associated with critical and creative thinking. That is, the thinking errors that people make when looking at critical and creative thinking. And there are lots of them out there. It all involves understanding which all of these errors, making application. And the way I make application is one of the assignments in my course is that they are to identify a local or national newspaper and to read the opinion section of that newspaper. And they are to write a letter back to the editor identifying the specific critical thinking errors by name from the Vincent Ruggiero book, from their textbook, and to write that letter calling the editor out on his or her critical thinking errors. And then they are to send that letter back to the editor with the corrections to that editorial. It's funny, I have a friend of mine who has worked for many years at my local newspaper, and he can always tell when one of my students is sending in a letter back to him because of the references to specific critical thinking errors that he may have made in his editorial. If their letter gets published in that newspaper, whatever local newspaper or national newspaper there is, they get extra credit for that in the class. And I don't normally give extra credit, but if it gets published, they get extra credit. And what I found is at least one, sometimes more, often get their letters published in the local newspaper, identifying specific critical thinking errors by name. Okay, so in the previous section, identifying the facts associated with critical thinking, or at least teaching those facts, that's the easy part. Here's where it gets interesting. This section we're going to talk about something that impacts thinking tremendously, and that is self. The biases, the blocks, the preconceived notions that a person has about the world, how the person was raised, those are incredibly important to the way we think. And I call this section out, it's incredibly important and a little bit more difficult to teach in the classroom, especially to our adult returning students. So what I have students do in this section is to look at themselves in a mirror and to identify those factors, those values, for lack of a better word, that both guide and hinder them in their critical and creative thinking. And I have them identify that in a paper. They are to look at the top 5 values that impact both hinder and guide them in their critical thinking. But they can't use these very common values. I pull those off the table. They can't use things like my family, my marriage, my children, my home. That's a value. Well, that's so common that I pulled that off the table. Same thing with religion and God and religious beliefs. Same thing with friends. And the same thing with patriotism and love of country. I pull those very common values off the table, and they have to identify their own top five values. What's interesting is I used to do the top 10 values that both guide and hinder them. And what I found was that students couldn't identify 10. They couldn't do it. And they were sort of making things up. So I dropped it down to 5, and even the top 5 values that a person has are hard for many students to identify and to write about. But I had them do this in a paper, and there's some observations I have made over the years. First, there's a lot of anger. And I think there's anger from students because they've never done this, especially business students who are so used to a content-laden curriculum, both undergraduate and into graduate. When they get to this section where they have to hold a mirror up, often they get angry at the person who's holding a mirror and not necessarily what they see in the mirror. It's very interesting because the comments that I get is, we've never had to do this before. I've never had to look at myself. How does that relate to what I'm doing in business? But it certainly does bear out for them. They never had to do this before, which is very interesting. The university I teach at is a liberal arts college, and we have a lot of very similar kinds of courses where these kinds of exercises are integrated into a lot of different majors and programs and classes across the university. And so I find it very interesting for those students who come and do their graduate work with us where they've never taken a look at themselves or their values. And so I think that might contribute to some of the anger. But after they've done it, an observation I have is they never thought of how their values impacted their critical thinking before. Take money, for example. They say that money is one of their values, and yet what they find is that they don't spend money effectively in how it hinders them. And so they're faced with this tension between what they do and what they write. What guides them and what hinders them. And they face it in reality on a piece of paper, and they report it to a professor. It's very interesting to see the reactions associated. But I think the biggest reaction is how they find that this exercise is so valuable and how they can relate it directly to their organization's values. As they espouse them in their organization, whether it's in their mission statement or their day-to-day practice. So, identifying their own values and how those values impact critical thinking is an incredibly important and much more difficult way to teach, thing to teach in a critical thinking course. Now, the third section, I'm going to start a little early here, and that is, I want you to write down these lines, because we're going to talk about applying critical thinking skills in your own life. So you can see there's a squiggly line, and then another little squiggly line, and something that looks like 4 mountains, and then this sort of boat thing. I want you to write these down, because in just a minute, I'm going to ask you a question about these as we talk about making application of critical thinking in daily life. So in the first section, we talk about the teaching of the facts associated with critical thinking. The second section, we talk about how you and your values impact the way you think. And in this final section, we talk about how to apply the critical thinking skills in your daily life and through some of the exercises that I do in my class. Okay, so did you write these objects down on a piece of paper? You have sort of a straight line there, and then a little weird squiggly thing here, and then kind of like 4 mountains here, and then this kind of boat object here. And so did you write these 4 objects down? What I want you to do is I want you to tell me what comes next. What's the object that comes next in the sequence here? While you figure that out, let me explain why I do these kinds of exercise. Each week in my class, and I teach these classes mainly in 7-week formats to adult returning students, and I teach them mainly online. But most of the time, students get frustrated with these kinds of brain quizzes. But this is all about making application of critical thinking to your life. It is brain calisthenics, if you will. And so this is one of the more difficult ones, and I wanted to see if you got that. I have these kinds of problems each and every week during my 7-week class. And at the end of the course, students are going to be required to take a short quiz filled with 10 randomly selected brain quizzes that are worth just a small percentage of their final grade, but nonetheless enough for them to be motivated to do it. And so what comes next in this sequence of squiggly lines? Well, this is not too dissimilar from the 9-box problem you were or 9-dot problem you were faced with earlier. What you have to do is kind of look outside the box for the solution to this problem. And the people who look creatively at the way this is even drawn are the ones who often can solve it. So if you kind of tilt your head to the left, what you'll find is that they are not randomly generated squiggly lines or objects. They are, in fact, meaningful symbols. And let me turn them for you here. If I turn them this way, I think you can see that. It's hard to tell on these video presentations what you can see and what you can't. But if I turn it that way, and if I put my hand there, you see the number 1, there's the number 2, there's the number 3, there's the number 4, and so obviously the next symbol that comes is this symbol, the number 5. Again, it's not too hard to figure that out if you kind of make application of the concepts that we talk about in this class of critical and creative thinking. Now, here's sort of the star of the show with regard to my course. The second book that we use in the course is this wonderful collection of the lives of people in this book collected by the authors called Creators on Creating. And there are some incredible creative people that have just short chapters on each of their lives and what they created. Everyone from Maya Angelou to Frank Zappa, from Federico Fellini to Ingrid Bergman. All of these people are, and I think there are about 40 of these people in this collection of creators. And I have the students pick 6 of them, 1 for each week, just to get to know, to answer some basic questions about. And I want them to explain their lives to me in certain parameters. And in the final week of class, I want them to give me their report. But see, here's the catch. They have to summarize 6 creators from this book, but, wait for it, they can't use paper, electronic paper, or any paper products to do it. In other words, they can't write another term paper. They can't submit it on PowerPoint. They have to think of some other way to explain these 6 creators from this book to me. And now, of course, I have a rubric and certain parameters, but there's only one rule. You can't use paper, paper products, or electronic paper to do this. Now, in a personal example of this, I did this assignment myself. And so I'm not sure if you're going to be able to see this, but I want to show this to you. This is my assignment that I did for this book. And one of the parts of this assignment is they have to integrate these creators with themselves in some way. For example, how they're similar or not similar, or how they have works of art in common with them. It doesn't matter, but somehow they have to integrate themselves. So this is my chance to integrate this, and I don't know if you can see this. I'll hold this up. This is my creation here. It's not on paper. There are no paper products that are used in this work of art. This is what I call the Coffin Quilt. My Coffin Quilt. I know you can't see this, but this is a coffin that I've created using fabric, and I likened this to the creators that I chose because I couldn't find things that I had in common with them except for one, and that was they're all dead, and someday I'm going to be dead too. So if you open up the coffin, and again I apologize, but I don't know if you can see this. I'm going to stand up, what you will find is that there's a dead body in the coffin, and that's supposed to represent me. And then over on this side of the coffin are the lives of the 6 people that I chose from the book, plus myself. And then down there at the bottom is some stuff about me. Again, I apologize for not being able to show you this as nicely as I would like to. But this is a coffin. There's no paper that is used. I know, it's unusual. There's no paper that is used. It is creative. It is my Coffin Quilt. And it's been incredible over the years to see the level of creativity from students on how they've solved this problem in a creative way. And I have seen everything from food to models of the earth or models of brains to paintings to you name it. I have seen it. And it's funny to see the reactions associated with this assignment. At first there's this level of excitement, but it's quickly followed by anger because they're so used to having a final paper in every single course that they've had in every college they've been to, that thinking outside the box and applying critical and creative thinking to an assignment is foreign to you. Kind of like the 9-dot problem where culture pulls you back in to make you want to do nothing more than write another paper. Well, even though there's initial excitement, when people have to realize they have to do something different, even though there are no rules except you can't use paper, paper products, or electronic paper, people start to get angry at me and at this assignment. Well, there's also this need for over-guidance I have found, where they start asking me a lot of questions. Do you want it this way? Do you want it that way? Can I do this? And I keep repeating the same thing. The only rule is no paper, paper products, or electronic paper. So sometimes there's anger associated with this, followed by over-guidance, which I don't give them, which often leads to procrastination, even though I have checkpoints along the way that they have to report to me. How are you doing? What are you doing? Where are you doing it? What are the materials you're using? What's going on in your mind? It's so funny. Even at the end, I still have people using paper or paper products. Even though I say, no, I'm sorry, you can't use cardboard. That's a paper product. People still will say, well, can I use a cardboard box? No. Think outside the box. That's often a lot of fear associated with ambiguity, and this is an important skill for students to have anyway, is the ability to deal with ambiguity. And so there's fear associated how this is going to be graded. Remember, I'm not really interested in whether or not they share content with me about Frank Zappa. That's not what I'm interested in. What I am interested in is their ability to create and to communicate through that creation. And then there's this, I think, grateful acknowledgement that I've done something different that really can impact them in the way they apply critical thinking to their life, and a regret that they know they're going to have to use paper in the next course. They're going to have to write yet another 10-page paper with 5 APA citations. And so I encourage you all to think outside the box when assigning final assignments to your students. Think of different ways to have them communicate and that content to you that will empower them now and for their career and their workplace the very next day. So, in summary, first, thank you for attending this presentation. What I wanted to do was help you understand the importance of critical and creative thinking to the business curriculum. I also wanted you to understand the underlying objectives associated with critical and creative thinking. I wanted to relate that to how students could be innovative in their workplace. I wanted to share with you examples and assignments associated with the courses that I happen to teach, and for you to think about designing alternative kinds of assignments that really tap into that student's critical and creative thinking skills. Yes, it requires a little bit more work, but I believe it will be worth it in the long run, not just to your students, but to the organizations that your university and colleges identify with in sending graduates. Here are my references. I'm sure somehow they'll be made available through the magic of this conference, and I want to thank you again from the bottom of my heart for attending this workshop, for being in my home with me in North Georgia. My two wonderful dogs, Max and Phineas, behaved through the entire thing, which is a miracle in itself. Please feel free to contact me anytime you want. I'm available at whaney@brenau.edu. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
We are very proud to be ACBSP accredited.
I'm 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 proud to be ACBSP accredited.